Red Bull had no answer for McLaren's pace when Formula 1's season resumed after the summer break at Zandvoort, as Lando Norris dominated the Dutch Grand Prix from pole position. It wasn't just the fact they were beaten that makes Max Verstappen and Red Bull seriously worried, but by how much. This was the 5th time McLaren outqualified Red Bull in 2024, but the margin was more than twice its biggest advantage of the season. Norris translated that pace into an easy victory in the race, with the biggest winning margin of the season so far. That made this only the second weekend of 2024 when McLaren had an unquestionable and decisive performance advantage over Red Bull, the first being Hungary in July. There were other races where McLaren could and should have won, but its pace relative to Red Bull and at times Mercedes and Ferrari was similar. The strong Zandvoort showing followed the introduction of what McLaren team principal Andrea Stella called a substantial upgrade package. While not as big as the upgrade introduced for May's Miami Grand Prix that transformed McLaren's season, this was still another clear step forward for McLaren. As always, multiple factors fed into its pace advantage in qualifying particularly. Tyre preparation was essential, and as Stella argued, Norris's advantage of just over 3.5 tenths in qualifying was far beyond the performance gain of the upgrades. But the improvement from the upgrade played a part. So, too, the fact that the more benign and aerodynamically robust McLaren was less badly affected by the win than the Red Bull. On top of that, what Stella called the Lando Norris factor was significant. Zandvoort wasn't out of line with the pattern before the summer break of McLaren having the best all-round car, but one that isn't necessarily quite as fast as the Red Bull when the RB20 is at its peak. But it does show McLaren is only getting stronger. While McLaren is only getting better, Red Bull's troubles continued at Zandvoort. As Verstappen put it, compared to Norris he felt a bit more all over the place with the balance in his RB20. Not only did Red Bull have no significant upgrades, but it also rolled back aspects of previous upgrades in a bid to improve a car that has had a very narrow performance window. On a good day, say in qualifying in Austria or in the wet at Spa, it can have a big advantage, but too often its limitations hold it back. In terms of performance upgrades, Red Bull had only a modified halo fairing featuring Ferrari-style Cobra winglets and tweaked wing mirror stays. While the team said these both offered a downforce gain in terms of improving the airflow to other parts of the car, the time advantage will have been minor. But Red Bull's main focus is on understanding its problems. The dramatically revised engine cover bodywork introduced on Verstappen's car in Hungary, then removed for lower downforce Spa, returned at Zandvoort. This time, both drivers ran it, as Sergio Perez didn't in Hungary owing to a lack of available parts. However, there was a difference in floor spec between the two drivers. Verstappen reverted to the start of season floor, while Perez ran a version that was closer to the latest specification that featured a different surface shape and edges. But while there are some visible differences, the most significant variations were out of view in the underfloor, so it's impossible to gauge just how different the two specs were. What we do know is that this mix and match approach was very much an interim measure, a case of making the best of it while waiting for a proper upgrade down the line. As Verstappen says, there is no magic button. But there is a reason for optimism. An upgrade is in the pipeline for deployment soon, and Sergio Perez, who had an unremarkable run to 6th in the race, believes the knowledge gained at Zandvoort will help the team ramp up its upgrade in the coming weekends. Red Bull also felt that the configuration Perez ran in was the stronger of the two in terms of pace. The big question is whether Red Bull can tackle the problems of its stiff ride, a limiting factor that has made life difficult on bumpy tracks and where significant curb riding is needed, and the need to make it an easier car to drive within what can be changed this year. Verstappen has been critical of the car for some time, and that continued at Zandvoort, where he said over the radio that the car doesn't respond to his inputs and complained about the poor balance. The gains made haven't been as significant as hoped in 2024, particularly in faster corners, although at Zandvoort it was often the slower corners that were the problem. As technical director Pierre Vacher admitted in a recent interview with Autosport, it's possible Red Bull is pushing up against the ceiling of the RB20. That means that while changes will be easier to make for 2025, Red Bull might be limited in what it can do this year, and that could decide the World Championship. With 9 races remaining, Red Bull is still in a strong position in the Drivers' Championship, which Verstappen leads by 70 points, but the Constructors' Championship situation is far more parlous, as its advantage has dropped to just 30 points, with McLaren outscoring Red Bull in 8 of the past 9 race weekends. Upgrades are coming, and Red Bull at least appears to have helped Perez unlock more performance to limit the losses, but McLaren's Zandvoort success will have piled on the pressure. McLaren's Zandvoort package was characterised by Norris as its first proper upgrade since Miami. What McLaren introduced was not visually striking, not least because the side pods remained unchanged, but it did include changes to the front brake duct scoop, front and rear suspension fairings and floor edge. A new high downforce rear wing and beam wing package also appeared, improving the efficiency of the drag reduction when the DRS is deployed, something Norris felt was key to overtaking Verstappen in the race. Stella says that these are the final updates to these areas for 2024. However, there are still upgrades to other parts to come in upcoming races. The fact the package worked so well is testament to the depth of McLaren's understanding that's built up at the track with a largely unchanged car along with high quality simulation tools at its factory. Chief designer Rob Marshall described this as racing in a more old school way, not throwing constant small updates at the car. It's an approach that appears to pay dividends, particularly compared to Red Bull. The McLaren is now a true all-rounder, losing a little of its fast corner supremacy to be stronger in the slower stuff. The fact it performed so mightily at Zandvoort, historically a weak track, is proof of how far it has come, although Stella warned that who has the fastest car could still depend on conditions. As for Norris, he suggested that McLaren was destined to have dominated at Zandvoort even without the upgrades. There's more to come, meaning McLaren should be a threat across the remaining 9 races of the season. Norris's dominant weekend meant he delivered on his stated objective ahead of the weekend of delivering at world champion level. Norris executed superbly in several key areas. First, his qualifying lap was outstanding, giving him pole position by 3.5 tenths over Verstappen and outpacing teammate Oscar Piastri by half a second. Secondly, despite losing the lead to Verstappen at the start after, as he put it, going into wheel spin in the second phase, he closed on the Red Bull and passed Verstappen during the first stint. The start is the main area for concern. It's an area Norris says he's keen to improve, although McLaren's analysis has not found any consistent weakness in this area. Zandvoort was the 7th time in races this year, including sprints, where Norris has lost at least 1 position at the start, and the 4th time it's happened in a row. McLaren is well aware the Constructors' Championship is on the cards, but rightly sees the Drivers' title as still not worth giving serious consideration. As Stella points out, if McLaren can maximise its results in the upcoming races, then that could change things. After all, if you get the points, the championship will take care of itself. Norris still talks of his desire to fight for the title and the need to have a strong second half of the season to have any chance of that. Zandvoort was the perfect start, even though Verstappen's ability to drag every iota of performance from the car means he limited the damage by banking 18 points. Ferrari struggled at Zandvoort even more than anticipated. Its upgrades to fix the porpoising problems it has battled are still being worked on, but even so it was worse than expected in qualifying trim. During this phase of 2023, Ferrari hit trouble but solved its problems rapidly, but as Charles Leclerc says, it doesn't have the same quick fix this year. While the race pace of the car was strong enough for Leclerc to finish 3rd at Zandvoort, Ferrari is not currently a factor in the battle for wins and therefore can't affect the Red Bull versus McLaren battle too much. However, Mercedes is usually quick enough to disrupt it. The new Mercedes floor that ran on Friday at Spa but wasn't used for qualifying or the race returned at Zandvoort. According to trackside engineering director Andrew Shovlin, it worked well. Mercedes looked a threat for pole position after practice, but qualifying didn't go well. Lewis Hamilton was eliminated in Q2, although he had the underlying pace to have made the top 10. George Russell did reach Q3, but only managed 4th place thanks to tyre temperature troubles. The race then went badly, with Russell 7th, having run 3rd in the first stint, and Hamilton 8th after both opted to make a second pit stop for softs. Mercedes perhaps underachieved at Zandvoort, but its pace at times proved that it will continue to be in the thick of the fight at the front this year. And that could help or hinder Red Bull and McLaren depending on who Mercedes takes points off. What's clear is that McLaren and Norris have started the 10-race run-in determined to improve their strike rate with an upgraded car that's capable of consistent wins. Zandvoort is not the most representative track, especially considering the windy conditions, and the next race at Monza couldn't be a more different circuit in terms of car demands. But what the Dutch Grand Prix weekend proved is that Red Bull is still on the back foot, and that means McLaren is ideally placed to continue its run towards at least one World Championship.